title. The snow on Widow's Peak. In the mountains, silence ain't peace. It's a kind of punishment. The wind howled down from Widow's Peak, dragging snow through the black pines like a ghost that couldn't rest. Beneath that endless white, a cabin squatted low against the storm, its chimney coughing smoke like a dying man. Inside, Jonas Hale sat alone by the fire, his broad hands trembling as he cleaned a rusted Colt that hadn't fired since the night his wife died. 6 winters had passed, and still her voice lingered in the walls, soft, forgiving, and gone too soon. He'd built his life out of routine. Chop wood, tend the fire, try not to remember. But when he opened that cabin door to the sound of frantic knocking, the past and the storm both came roaring in. A woman stood there, half buried in snow, her dress torn, her face pale as moonlight. No horse, no coat, just fear. "Please," she gasped, voice breaking. "He's coming for me." Jonas stared at her, the barrel of his Colt glinting in the firelight. He hadn't heard a woman's voice in years, and now one was begging him to save her. "Who's coming?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "The man who killed my father." And somewhere out in that white wilderness, hoofbeats cracked through the storm. The snow had been falling for hours, heavy and relentless, coating the world in a silence so deep it pressed against the chest like water. Jonas wrapped the woman, Lydia Whitmore, in his only spare blanket, the wool damp with snow and sweat. Her hands were stiff, fingers curled like tiny claws against her chest. "You'll freeze if we don't move," Jonas said, his voice low, rough with years of smoke and sorrow. "Can you walk?" She shook her head, teeth chattering. I can't. Please." Jonas gritted his teeth. He hadn't touched anyone but horses since the fever took his wife. Yet here he was, carrying this fragile girl across the snow, each step a battle against wind that could strip skin from bone. The cabin door shuddered as he closed it behind them, cutting the world off like a tomb. Inside, the fire barely clung to life. Greenwood, unseasoned, hissed and spat, but it was all Jonas had. He stoked it, coaxing warmth into the room. Lydia sank into a chair, shivering violently, and Jonas stripped off his coat, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders. "You won't die here," he said, more to himself than her. She looked up with wide green eyes, frozen and trusting and afraid all at once. "Why are you helping me?" Jonas's chest tightened. "Because someone should, even if it's just for one night." They sat in silence as the wind rattled the cabin walls, a lonely sound that made every shadow twitch. Outside, the storm raged like a living thing. Inside, warmth began to creep back, fragile but insistent, a promise that survival was possible if only they had courage. Lydia's story spilled in whispers. Accusation. Lies. A man in town who claimed her innocence was sin. Jonas listened, hands gripping his knees, jaw clenched. The world had been cruel to her, and now it sought to finish the work. When the fire faltered, Jonas made the first of many impossible decisions. He would protect her, even if it cost him everything. The snow had fallen heavier since the first gray light of dawn had crept over the horizon, turning the Montana hills into a white wasteland, sharp and unyielding. The cold gnawed at Jonas's face and hands, a relentless reminder that this storm was no ordinary snow. It was the sort that buried lives under white silence, if you weren't careful. But he didn't feel the cold. Not entirely. Not while Lydia was wrapped in his coat behind him, her shivering making his chest tighten with guilt and worry. He moved through the drifts with careful precision, stepping where the old horse paths might have lain, though most of the world outside was buried under ice. The wind howled like a chorus of mourning spirits, carrying the scent of pine and frozen earth, and each gust made him grit his teeth against the bite of it. Behind him, Lydia clung to his back, as if he were the only tether to life she had left. Her dark hair, now damp from the storm and tangled, smelled faintly of pine smoke and desperation. Jonas couldn't bring himself to speak. Words would only steal from the urgency of survival. Instead, he relied on the rhythm of their movements, letting the horse's hooves crunch against the snow guide him, each step forward a fragile promise that they might see another dawn. He thought of Redemption Ridge, though he had never been there himself. Jonas had heard whispers in the saloons and around campfires of the town, where morality was measured in obedience and fear. The Whitmores were known for their stern eyes and sharper tongues. He had no desire to meet Ezra Whitmore in the light of day. But right now, that man was a shadow that haunted every step, every track they might leave in the snow. Jonas had seen men like Whitmore before. Righteous fury, cloaked in faith, dangerous enough to take the law into their own hands. And now, in the blizzard, the man's shadow stretched out over Lydia like a storm of its own, one Jonas had no choice but to outrun or face. Jonas guided the horse down a narrow gully, the walls of ice-strewn rock pressing close on either side, the wind whipping against them like a relentless drumbeat. Lydia's voice, soft and fragile, broke through the howl. "Jonas, what will they do if they find me?" He glanced back briefly, catching the fear in her green eyes. "They'll lie. They'll threaten. But you're not going back, Lydia. Not while I got breath in me." Her hands trembled as they clutched his shoulders. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he said, tightening his grip around the reins. "You've already done what matters, survived. That's enough." Even as he spoke, a sense of unease gnawed at him. The storm had created a tunnel of white, hiding not only the world around them, but also any threat that might be lurking just beyond sight. He had been a scout, a man of the mountains, accustomed to reading the terrain, but even his experience felt small against the fury of nature tonight. Snow covered their tracks as fast as they made them, but Jonas knew that was no guarantee. Men with hatred in their hearts had eyes sharper than he could imagine. Hours passed. The sun, a pale disk behind thick gray clouds, offered no warmth, only light enough to reveal the jagged outlines of cliffs and frozen streams. Jonas guided the horse down a slope, careful not to slip, and then paused briefly, listening. The storm had quieted slightly, a treacherous lull, he knew, because out here, quiet meant they were exposed. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Lydia pressed closer. I don't think so." Jonas focused. At first, all he heard was the wind. Then, beneath the howl, faint and irregular, came the sound of hooves. Not the slow rhythm of his own horse, but someone else. A shadow on the white canvas. His heart sank. "They found us," he said softly, almost to himself. He glanced at Lydia, whose wide eyes mirrored his own fear. "Stay down, stay quiet. We don't give them a reason to see us until we need to." She nodded, pressing her face against his back. Jonas guided the horse into a hollow, one that twisted into a smaller ravine, hoping the terrain would shield them from whatever eyes prowled the storm. Every muscle in his body tensed. He had faced outlaws and drifters, men who owed debts in blood, but never had he carried something so fragile, something alive, vulnerable, and entirely reliant on him. Then came the first shout, muffled and harsh, carried by the wind. "Whitmore girl." Jonas's jaw tightened. Ezra's voice, cold and unyielding, and the deputy's barked order mingled in the snow. He could hear men scrambling through the drifts, boots slamming, and the crack of wood against ice. Jonas cursed under his breath. He had to move. He had to make them lose the trail. He urged the horse faster, clinging to the reins as the animal's hooves sank deep into soft snow. The ravine narrowed, walls scraping the horse's sides, and branches snagged at Lydia's hair and cloak. She gasped. "It's too fast. I can't, you can't," Jonas said firmly. "I need you to hold on. You gotta trust me." Trust. The word hung heavy in the storm. She did, in that moment, and it was all he had. The chase continued for hours, a dangerous ballet through white drifts and jagged rocks. Jonas's mind worked with the precision of a tracker, predicting movements, covering tracks, and listening for every footfall in the snow. The men behind them were relentless. Jonas could hear Carson's sharp voice cutting through the air, commanding, threatening. But it was Ezra Whitmore he feared most. The righteous fury of a father who saw sin where there was none, who would rather see his daughter die than allow the truth to surface. At one point, the horse slipped on ice, a shudder running through its frame. Lydia cried out, but Jonas steadied her. "Steady," he said. "Hold tight. We're not done yet." The ravine opened into a frozen creek bed, the ice cracking faintly beneath the horse's hooves. Jonas guided them along, listening for any sign of pursuit. And then, just as the storm seemed to ease, the world became still, too still. Jonas stopped, listening. The wind had died down, but he could hear something else now, a different set of hooves, approaching, deliberate and calm. He froze, signaling Lydia to do the same. A figure emerged from the snow, riding a dark horse, cloak and hat drawn low. Jonas's pulse quickened. This wasn't Ezra or Carson. No, this was someone else. Someone quiet, calculating, almost spectral in the white. "Who's that?" Lydia whispered. Jonas's eyes narrowed. He didn't know, but he knew one thing. Whoever this was, they were dangerous. And somehow, he had the sense that the night was about to change in a way he could never have prepared for. The stranger's horse stopped at the edge of the creek bed, hooves crunching softly in the snow. Jonas tightened his grip on the reins. "You lost something, Holloway." The voice was low, smooth, but laced with something that made Jonas's skin crawl. "I'm not looking for trouble," Jonas replied, keeping the rifle across his lap. "Move on." The stranger chuckled, the sound carrying easily in the frozen air. "Trouble doesn't come looking for me, Mr. Holloway. Trouble comes looking for everyone around me. And right now, I'm looking for her." Lydia pressed closer to Jonas, a whisper of fear brushing against his ear. "Jonas, who is he?" Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down like the storm itself. Decisions had to be made, fast, precise, and unyielding, or they would not see the sun rise again. The three of them, Jonas, Lydia, and the shadowed stranger, stood on the frozen creek, the storm finally slowing to a bitter drizzle, the white world around them holding its breath. Jonas knew, then, that survival was no longer just about outrunning men or the cold. Survival was about choices, and sometimes the right choice was the one that cut the deepest. And somewhere in the swirling snow, the past was catching up. The wind had fallen to a cruel whisper by mid-afternoon, leaving the world outside of silence, so sharp it felt as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Snow drifted lazily in the light, coating the jagged rocks and splintered trees with a deceptive calm. Jonas and Lydia moved through the hidden passes Jonas had memorized in childhood, but even the old paths betrayed them now under the white weight of the blizzard. Every step was a gamble, every snow-laden branch a potential trap. He could hear Lydia's breath coming in ragged whispers against the inside of his coat, each shiver a reminder that the cold was a thief of life, not just comfort. They paused briefly in a hollow where the trees crowded close, their limbs bending under the weight of frost. Jonas's dark eyes scanned the horizon. Footprints, fresh footprints cutting through the snow. Not theirs, not the spectral tracks of a stranger they had encountered hours before, but deliberate, quick, and viciously precise. "They're close," he muttered, voice low as the wind stole his words. Lydia pressed against his back, eyes wide and glimmering with the green of fear and frost. "Jonas, they're going to take me back." They won't," he said firmly, though inside he wrestled with the gnawing truth. Numbers and fury often outweighed skill and courage in this world. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, letting the cold bite into his hands, making his knuckles white. Survival here wasn't just about speed or cunning. It was about the choices a man made when the walls closed in. Jonas led them down a ridge that curved sharply into a canyon, the cliffs rising like frozen sentinels on either side. The sound of pursuit followed them, faint but steady, and then suddenly a crack rang out. A tree snapped under a man's weight, or perhaps the fall of a boot into hidden snow. Lydia gasped, clinging tighter. "They're splitting up," Jonas said, noting the spacing of the tracks. "One's trying to flank us." He guided the horse into a narrow passage where the walls pressed close, hoping the terrain would give them a defensive advantage. He knew, instinctively, that the moment to act would come soon. Either he forced their pursuers to the ground, or they would be overwhelmed. Then, a sudden figure appeared ahead. Not one of their pursuers, but the stranger. The one with the low voice and horse dark as night. "You're fast," the stranger said, dismounting with an ease that betrayed years of experience. "But not fast enough to outrun your past." Jonas leveled his rifle. "You're not helping. You've got your own business to worry about." The stranger's eyes, dark and unreadable beneath the brim of his hat, swept over Lydia. For a moment, Jonas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "You're protecting her," the stranger said. "Good. But make no mistake, she carries a price on her head. And people like me, we don't forget debts." Jonas felt the weight of the moral crucible pressing against his chest. He could fight the stranger, risk them both falling in the snow, or he could accept his temporary alliance. Every instinct screamed distrust. And yet, the stranger moved like a shadow of inevitability, guiding them deeper into the canyon, where they could momentarily lose sight of their pursuers. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the groaning of frozen limbs and the whisper of wind through ice-laden pines. Finally, they reached an abandoned cabin, half buried in snow, its timbers brittle but offering enough shelter to rest. Jonas secured the horse, his rifle resting across his lap as he surveyed the dim interior. The stranger leaned against the doorway, hat tipped low. "Names matter little here," the stranger said. "But I know yours, Holloway, and I know what's coming for you. Don't mistake my presence for friendship." Jonas's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for friendship, just not betrayal." The stranger's lips curved slightly. "Betrayal comes naturally in this world. The question is which side of it you choose." Lydia looked between them, confusion and trust battling on her face. "Jonas, can we trust him?" Jonas didn't answer immediately. Trust was a currency rarer than gold out here, but survival demanded it for now. The sound of approaching hooves broke the tense stillness. Jonas and the stranger moved quietly to the windows, guns ready. Outside, two riders emerged, snow crusted on their coats, one unmistakably Deputy Carson, the other a man Jonas recognized from the town. One of Whitmore's hired hands, ruthless and eager. They were scanning the canyon floor, boots crunching through the drift, eyes sharp. "They think we're cornered," Jonas muttered. "They're wrong." The stranger studied the men, calculating. "You'll need more than courage. You'll need a choice you've never had to make before. Lies are cheap. Out here, they cost blood." Jonas's mind raced. He could fight, kill the men outside, or try to escape through a back trail hidden beneath snow. Either choice carried danger. Either could doom them. He felt Lydia's hand on his arm, a tremor of fear and trust intertwined. "Do something," she whispered. Jonas took a deep breath, heart pounding. He knew the moment of reckoning had come. With the stranger at his side, he moved to the back exit, leading Lydia quietly into the snow, the bitter air burning their lungs. He could hear shouts behind them, Carson's voice sharp with rage, Ezra Whitmore's anger unmistakable as it cut through the canyon. But then betrayal struck, subtle and cruel. The stranger's hand brushed Jonas's shoulder, not in warning, but with the faintest shift that nudged them off the hidden path. Jonas's heart sank as he realized the truth. The stranger had a different plan, a different endgame. They were exposed. "Why?" Jonas hissed, glancing back. The stranger's eyes gleamed. "Because some debts must be paid, Holloway. And she isn't yours to save alone." Lydia gasped, clutching Jonas, fear and shock etched on her face. Jonas's mind screamed at him. Fight the stranger or escape. Every second counted. The canyon walls amplified the pursuit, each shot outside a warning, a threat. Carson and Whitmore were gaining, reckless in their anger. Jonas made a choice, pure and unflinching. He would protect Lydia, no matter the cost. Turning sharply, he fired a warning shot that cracked the snow like thunder, driving Carson back a step. Then, With calculated precision, he maneuvered the horse into a narrow crevice, forcing the stranger to hesitate. The man cursed, slipping slightly on ice, giving Jonas the critical seconds they needed. "Run!" Jonas shouted to Lydia, and she obeyed, clinging to him as they surged forward, leaving the snow-caked treachery behind. The storm, once a relentless enemy, now became their shield. Snow fell thick, white, blinding their pursuers, masking the tracks and breathing space. Jonas pressed forward, every step a prayer, every decision a testament to the fragile morality of survival in this unforgiving world. They reached a frozen stream, the ice cracking underfoot, and Jonas guided the horse along its edge, keeping low and moving fast. Behind them, voices shouted, guns cracked, but they could no longer see their enemies. Only the cold and the snow and the narrow trail forward. In the dim light of the late afternoon, Jonas finally allowed himself to glance at Lydia. Her face, pale but alive, shone with trust and awe. She had followed him through terror and betrayal, yet still clung to hope. And Jonas understood then that survival wasn't just about outrunning the storm or men. It was about the courage to stand, the courage to act, and the courage to trust, even when the world demanded that you doubt. The stranger had betrayed them, but Jonas would not. Not now, not ever. The canyon stretched ahead, endless and cold, yet somewhere beyond the snow and frost, there would be a place to rest, a place to survive. And for the first time since the storm had begun, Jonas felt something like determination settle deep in his chest. Because survival wasn't just a race, it was a choice. And he had chosen. The sun had long vanished behind the jagged peaks, leaving the canyon draped in steel-gray twilight. Snow continued its relentless fall, painting the world in monochrome, but the wind carried a weight far heavier than frost, the thrum of pursuit and the certainty of bloodshed. Jonas crouched low on the ridge, eyes scanning the shadowed canyon floor. Somewhere below, hooves cracked against ice and stone. The enemy had not given up. Not yet. Lydia shivered beside him, wrapped tightly in layers of borrowed clothing, and Jonas could feel her fear radiate through the coat pressed against her back. He knew the worst of the storm had passed, but it had not dulled the threat. Deputy Carson, Ezra Whitmore, and that hired gun, they were relentless, driven by vengeance and the twisted pride of men who believed authority and blood could bend the world to their will. "We can't keep running," Jonas murmured, voice low and measured. He didn't dare let it tremble. "They'll catch us if we try to outrun them forever." Lydia's green eyes, wide with terror, sought his. "Then what do we do?" Jonas hesitated, feeling the weight of every decision, every choice that had led them here. Every step he had taken through the snow, every life he had vowed to protect. He realized now that survival would demand more than speed. It would demand confrontation. "Listen to me," he said, his jaw set. "We make our stand. Here, if we keep running, we die one step from safety. If we fight, we might survive." She nodded slowly, fear battling hope, and Jonas felt a faint flicker of resolve pass between them. The canyon walls offered the only advantage they had: narrow passages and frozen ledges, places where three men couldn't leverage their numbers against two. From the shadows emerged the hired gun first, moving like a wolf along the ridge. Jonas's rifle found him, barrel gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The shot rang out, sharp and unflinching. The man tumbled back, sliding across ice, but he was not finished. Jonas felt a prickle of unease. This fight would not be over with a single shot. Carson's voice cut through the storm's whisper, loud and cruel. "Holloway, you can't hide from what's owed. Hand her over, and I'll let you walk away with your life." Jonas gritted his teeth. "There ain't no price on her life," he shouted back. "And I ain't walking away from what's right." Ezra Whitmore appeared next, flanked by a shadowy figure Jonas didn't recognize. A man riding fast, his face hidden beneath a scarf and hat. Jonas's heart sank. The stranger from the canyon, the one he thought had betrayed them, had returned. And now, aligned with their enemies, The cold seemed to deepen, gnawing at his resolve as he realized the cruel truth. The odds had just shifted, and survival demanded more than courage. It demanded sacrifice. Lydia whispered, barely audible, "Jonas, what do we do now?" Jonas Eichmethirsch. In that moment, he felt the crushing weight of all the ghosts he had carried for years. The memory of his father, gunned down over a disputed claim. The betrayal of men he once called friends. The death of his brother in a skirmish over nothing more than pride. Every scar, every loss, every quiet, empty night on the plains, they all led to this moment. "We fight," he said simply, "but we do it smart." Jonas guided them to a jagged ledge overlooking the frozen creek below. Snow and ice would slow the horses, making the attackers vulnerable. He planted the rifle against a rock, sighting along the frozen path. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and the sound of shallow breathing from his pursuers. The first shot struck the hired gun in the leg. He screamed, sliding across ice and snow, unable to rise quickly. Carson cursed and dove behind a boulder, firing blindly. Ezra Whitmore, fanatical and furious, charged down the ridge, knife glinting in the moonlight. Jonas fired, and the bullet caught Ezra's shoulder, dropping him to one knee. But the shadowed stranger moved with unnatural speed, lunging toward Lydia. Jonas reacted instantly, stepping between them, rifle but smashing into the man's chest. They grappled in the snow, frost burning their skin, the desperation of life and death making every movement violent and raw. Jonas's strength, fueled by years of solitary survival and grief, held. He shoved the man back, rifle rising, barrel pressed to the intruder's chest. "Who sent you?" Jonas demanded, voice harsh, teeth clenched. The man's lips twisted beneath his scarf. "I'm owed a debt, and I'm collecting it. She belongs to those who control the law in Redemption Ridge." Jonas felt the old anger surge, a righteous, furious tide of morality and loyalty. "She ain't yours. She's not anyone's to claim." From the ridge above, Carson and the remaining man began their descent, guns drawn. Jonas had seconds, and he made a choice that would etch itself into his soul. He fired again, a shot that cracked through the frozen air. The last attacker stumbled, tumbling into the creek below, disappearing under the ice. Ezra Whitmore groaned, raising his head, blood trickling from his mouth. Jonas approached slowly, boots crunching against snow, rifle at the ready. Whitmore's eyes, wild with rage and disbelief, met Jonas's. "This isn't over," Whitmore hissed, but there was defeat in his tone. He understood, finally, that vengeance alone could not conquer courage or resolve. Lydia, trembling but alive, moved to Jonas's side. "You saved me," she whispered, voice catching with awe and gratitude. Jonas looked down at her, the flickering firelight from the small lantern they'd managed to carry catching her pale, frost-kissed face. "No," he said quietly. "We saved each other. Out here, it takes more than courage. It takes trust and choices you never thought you'd have to make." The night fell fully, stars glittering cold and distant above the canyon. Jonas stood tall, rifle still ready, but his chest eased as he realized the immediate threat had passed. He had confronted not only the physical danger, but the ghosts of his past, the betrayals, the deaths, the empty nights, and had emerged determined, still standing, still committed to justice in a world that often forgot it. Somewhere, beyond the ridge and the frostbitten plains, lay safety, and Jonas, hardened by loss but guided by love and resolve, would carry Lydia there. Because in the desert, mercy may ride slower than the wind, but it rides nonetheless. The first pale light of dawn touched the canyon's jagged edges, glinting on icicles and frost-dusted rocks. The wind had shifted from the biting howl of the night to a faint, mournful sigh through the bare canyon trees. Snow crunched beneath Jonas's boots as he crept forward, rifle slung across his shoulder, Lydia close at his side. They had survived the storm, survived the night, but the shadows of Redemption Ridge had not yet loosened their grip. Jonas could see the remnants of the pursuit ahead, broken branches, disturbed snow, and tracks that led toward a narrow ravine. His heart tightened. Somewhere there, Deputy Carson and his twisted band of enforcers had regrouped. He knew there would be no parley. These men thrived on fear, control, and blood. Nothing else would satisfy them. Lydia shivered against him, still pale from the night's frostbite. "Jonas, I don't want to fight anymore," she whispered, her voice fragile. He shook his head, eyes scanning the ravine. "There ain't no other way," he said. "We've come this far. If we turn back, they'll hunt you again. They'll never stop. This ends today, or it ends with us not breathing at all." The ravine opened like a gash in the frozen earth. Jonas and Lydia descended carefully, boots sliding on thin ice, hearts pounding with the rhythm of fear and defiance. Then they saw him, Carson, waiting at the far end, his pistol raised, the shadowed figure of Whitmore slouched beside him, the hired gun staggering behind, still recovering from the night's previous wounds. "You shouldn't have come," Carson called, his voice a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You can't outrun the law or your sins." Jonas felt a slow, cold fury rise in him. "The law isn't justice, Carson. You've shown that over and over. You killed what little honor you had when you tried to ruin an innocent girl. And now, you answer to me." Without hesitation, he raised his rifle. Time slowed. Every flake of snow, every echo of distant canyon walls, every ragged breath seemed magnified. Carson fired, the shot ringing sharp in the crisp morning air, and Jonas dove behind a rock. The bullet scraped stone, sending up shards that glittered in the weak sun. Lydia pressed herself against him. "Jonas," she murmured, fear mixing with awe. He whispered back, voice steady, "Hold fast. We're close now. This ends here." The next few minutes unfolded like a nightmare and a dream intertwined. Bullets spat from stone to stone. Snow kicked up in a blinding clouds, and the canyon became a jagged chessboard where survival demanded every ounce of instinct, courage, and grit. Jonas moved with precision, taking aim at the hired gun first. One shot, a clean hit, sent him sprawling, unable to continue the fight. Carson cursed, furious at his man's collapse. Whitmore, wild-eyed and desperate, charged at Jonas with his long knife. Jonas met him head-on, fists and rifle butt clashing against desperation. Whitmore lunged, rage fueling him, and Jonas sidestepped, swinging the rifle in a calculated arc that knocked the knife from the older man's hand. Whitmore fell, sprawled against the snow, coughing and defeated. Carson, the last remaining threat, raised his pistol once more, eyes narrowing. "You think you've won, Holloway?" he spat. "You've got nothing, no law, no backup. You'll die out here, just like all the cowards who try to oppose me." Jonas's finger hovered on the trigger. He could feel the weight of the rifle, the cold pressing into his bones, the ghosts of his past whispering. But he didn't hesitate. One careful squeeze, and Carson fell, rolling in the snow, screaming until the echo was swallowed by the canyon. The fight was over. The silence that followed was sharp, almost deafening. Jonas sank to his knees, exhaustion racking him, heart hammering. Lydia crawled to his side, hands trembling as she pressed against his chest. "Jonas, it's over. We survived." He looked down at her, the morning light catching her frost-touched hair, the fear still lingering in her wide green eyes, and felt a swelling of relief and something else, something he hadn't felt in years: hope. "It ain't over until we reach safety," he murmured, voice hoarse. But this is the hard part done. They stayed there for a long moment, the snow falling gently around them like a quiet benediction, before Jonas rose slowly. He helped Lydia to her feet, supporting her fragile frame against the cold. Together, they moved through the canyon, leaving behind the twisted forms of their enemies, the ghosts of past lies, and the bitter weight of vengeance finally paid in full. As they reached the crest of the next ridge, the land opened to a frozen plain, the horizon painted in soft pink and gold. The sun rose fully, spilling warmth over the snow, reflecting off ice and canyon walls. Jonas inhaled deeply, the scent of pine and smoke filling his lungs. Beside him, Lydia's fingers brushed his, small but steady, and for the first time in years, he felt the possibility of peace. "No more running," Lydia said softly, voice barely above the wind. "We have a chance to live, to actually live." Jonas nodded, feeling the weight of the past lift, if only slightly. Some debts, they aren't paid in gold. They're paid in blood. But the ones worth keeping are paid in courage, trust, and love. They rode slowly across the frozen plain, the first warmth of day breaking over the horizon. Behind them, Redemption Ridge and its shadows faded into memory, and before them lay the uncertain promise of life, freedom, and the quiet, enduring power of doing what is right, even when the world demands otherwise. In the West, justice is slow, and mercy rides slower. But for those who survive, for those who hold fast to courage and conscience, the horizon always waits. The canyon was silent now. Snow drifted slowly over the tracks of pursuit, erasing the marks of violence and desperation from the night before. Jonas and Lydia rode side by side, their breath misting in the cold morning air, the weight of fear and survival slowly lifting from their shoulders. The sun had climbed higher, spilling gold across the frozen plains, and for the first time since they'd met, they allowed themselves to breathe. Jonas's eyes lingered on Lydia. She was safe. She was alive. And somehow, against the cruelty of men and the bitter wilderness they had endured, her hand found his, tentative at first, then firm, as if sealing a promise not only to each other but to the lives they had chosen to preserve. "There's a long road ahead," Jonas said softly, voice rough from the wind and sleepless hours. "But it's ours now. Nobody can take it from us." Lydia nodded, tears glinting in her green eyes, catching the morning light. "We've survived the worst they could throw at us. And yet, we're still standing, still together." Behind them, the ghosts of the past, the lies, the betrayals, the men who had sought to destroy them, were swallowed by the snow, fading into memory. Jonas had confronted not only their enemies, but his own grief, the memories of loss and solitude that had haunted him since Martha and Samuel were gone. In saving Lydia, he had also reclaimed a piece of himself, finding purpose and courage in the act of protection and love. They rode on, the canyon opening into rolling plains dotted with skeletal trees and frozen streams, each mile forward a step away from vengeance and toward life. The cold still bit at their faces, but now it was sharp with clarity, not fear. Every ridge they crossed, every horizon they faced, was a testament to endurance, to the strength of morality in a world that had little patience for justice. Jonas looked down at Lydia once more. In this land, the wind carries dust and regret, but it also carries hope. Remember that. She smiled, faint but steady, and pressed closer. "I'll remember." The sun climbed higher, glinting off the snow like the promise of a new beginning. For Jonas and Lydia, the trail ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs. And sometimes in the West, that was enough. Some debts aren't paid in gold. They're paid in courage, in compassion, in the willingness to stand against injustice, no matter the odds. As they disappeared over the horizon, the canyon held its quiet vigil, a reminder that even in the harshest lands, even against the darkest men, the human heart could endure, and that love, trust, and courage could carve a path through the storm.